Hi everyone. I've really realized over the last few months that in online teaching and learning, one of the hardest parts is actually finding examples of lessons and getting to see how someone else structures their content. And so I thought I'd walk you through a basic session, nothing fancy, but just kind of an idea of what a weekly session might look like. This is from an American history course that I taught for 10th grade. This is in the Schoology learning management system. Although it could be structured into any course content management system. So I'm starting with the big overview. This is when I click on my weekly folder. This would be the folder that students would complete over the course of a week. And you can kind of see, I try to limit myself to not so many pages, so it's not hugely overwhelming for kids. And I also try to include a variety of activities. So in this case, there's a graphic organizer mixed in here along with a reading. There is kind of a fun activity mixed in, and then a discussion. So I'm going to click on the session plan to kind of show you. Usually in any content that I design, I start with some sort of overview. I find that it's really helpful for learners to be able to see kind of where they're headed for the week. So here you can see there's an overview of the content for the week, an outline of kind of essential ideas that we'll be focusing on. There's a quick video from me talking the students through the content for that week, and there's some standards in here, some announcements, and then and this is the part that the kids love, an actual list of here's what you need to do this week and what the point value will be for each of those, as well as a suggested schedule. So this is like, how do you break out that week's worth of content into manageable chunks? Okay, and so then the navigation in Schoology, it uses this next button to get to the next page, although you could always jump back to the folder level using your breadcrumbs. So I'm going to click next. And then in here, there's this was the beginning of a unit, and so really wanted to focus on what the standards for this unit would be. And so I have some basic kid-friendly standards in here, as well as I'm using the mastery tool inside of Schoology, which would be a whole other video, but I was giving kids a heads up about how that mastery tool was working for this session. Then I have jumping into the actual content. This was a session on the Roaring Twenties, and so giving the students some background information about disillusionment. There's a link out to a reading here, but I've also given the kids that link in other formats. And they're completing a graphic organizer, which is built in Google Docs here. And so you can see they're kind of doing a cause and effect. And so these are sections of the reading that we have over here. What life was like before the 1920s, and then the students from their reading are supposed to figure out what was life like during the 1920s and what were the long-term effects of that. This is kind of a lot of scaffolding because this was relatively early in the year. Later in the year, I would expect that the kids would start breaking down these portions of the graphic organizers as well, but I was kind of helping them into the process. So then they are going to the next page and submitting their graphic organizer. You can see I have a rubric here that's connected to the standards. So those standards we identified as things we're going to cover this week, and then what does excellent look like, good, needs improvement, etc. Absolutely love the option to use rubrics in Schoology, because then from my Dropbox I can easily go in and quickly grade those, but also give kids some details on what was missing. Next, they're doing something kind of fun. This was a hangover from an older version of this class. They are reading about the slang of the 1920s, and then they're actually writing a conversation between two people living in the 1920s about one of those key areas. So the things in the graphic organizer that they looked at that really drastically changed in the 1920s, they're going to write about one of those topics using the slang of the 1920s. And so it looks like I have a broken link in there. It's been a while since this session was taught. Of course, I would update that if I were using it with students now. But it had some of those funny phrases from the 20s, like bee's knees and that kind of stuff. And I gave them some example dialogues here as well, so they had some idea of what those could look like. Let me open one of them for you, just so you can have an idea. You can see the term flapper, juice joint, whatever. But so the students were actually doing two things here. First, getting familiar with the culture of the 1920s, but also demonstrating their understanding of how life changed during the 20s. They're submitting their dialogue here. Again, we have another rubric. And then what they were doing is researching some of the key figures from the 1920s. There is a chart here that kind of structures that for them, of who some of those figures are, and they kind of just jot down a few notes about them because on the next page, we're doing an award ceremony for the 1920s. And so this is a discussion board, and the students had to decide who was they were nominating people for this celebration of the 1920s. They nominated a villain, a hero, a person that lived in the 1920s who's most influential today, and then another category of their choice. This was super fun because it really gave the kids a chance to think about those figures from the 1920s and how they might impact us today. I have a basic rubric in here. This is a rubric that repeats from discussion to discussion so that kids get really comfortable with that and what their expectations are within discussion. Then we have a look ahead to kind of where we headed in the next session. And then because of the way that Schoology is set up, I always end with this graphic, because what happens if you keep clicking next, it'll jump into the next folder within that course session. So I give them this graphic just to let them know that the session's done. But that gives you an idea kind of how I set up a weekly session. Always start with a session plan. This one had a little bit more of a standards overview than usual because it was the first one in a unit, but I do have some sort of standards, especially in the session plan. Try to do a variety of activities. This particular session didn't have a quiz, but I will often include some sort of quiz in there, especially quizzes that include images and video for them to really process what they're learning. And then always wrapping up with that look ahead. So essentially, here's what we did this week, and here's what next week looks like. So gives you kind of an overview of what a session can look like, and sort of some of my underlying philosophies. I hope it's helpful. Thanks.